March is a frantic month in the Philippines for young adults. Graduation ceremonies, semestral breaks, long weekends brought by the observance of Holy Week, and the month which officially kickstarts the summer season in the country. They have always enjoyed welcoming this month because this meant freedom to do so many things that define their young, wild, and free lives. Parties, celebrations, group outings, and free time to do just about anything, at least for the next few weeks. On the eve of March 18, 1996, one joyous celebration would come to a grinding halt and would claim the lives of many. Ozone Disco is a cocktail lounge and restaurant bar located near the 11th World Scout Jamboree Memorial Rotonda along Timog Avenue in Quezon City. It was opened in 1991 by Hermino Ocampo, operating under Westwood Entertainment Company Incorporated, who bought the land and the building itself from the owner of the previous establishment, the famous Bird Land owned by Sergio Orgao in the 80s. The initial idea was for the building to be a residential house for the Ocampo family. However, as a business-minded individual, Hermino decided to renovate the building and turn it into a nightclub. He looked for investors to build the disco club and found four other individuals who agreed to finance the business: his wife Raquel Ocampo, Alfredo Chua, Rosita Cu, and her son Sonny Cu. The 200 square meter club hosts several guest areas, a DJ booth, a dressing room at the back, a long kitchen, a minibar on the left side, two comfort rooms on both sides at the far end, a mezzanine just above the minibar, and a large section of an open dance floor, which occupies most of the center field. The club profiles a rugged but sleek persona with its acoustic foam insulation and egg carton box walling, allowing soundproof capabilities and thus lessening the effects of the loud disco music to outside establishments. The club has two doors structuring the main entrance connected by a narrow 12-meter hallway, where the reception desk lies in the middle waiting for guests. This is also where people write their entry into the club logbook and pay the corresponding entrance fee. According to Gerald Loyola, then waiter for the Ozone Disco and also a survivor of the tragedy, the doors are profiled to be pushed when entering or to be pulled when leaving, because the owner is a firm believer in feng shui. He added that this was the advice given to the owner by a feng shui expert, believing that when doors are swung inwards and in one direction only, money will flow for the business the same way. The club would eventually gain reputation and in a few years' time become a hit spot for young adults because of its affordable rates, delicious food, and rhythmic vibes. It was one dry and humid Monday evening of March 18. Most of the high school and college students have already completed the school year and more than ready to lavish away their academic break time, be it through simple gatherings, sleepovers, beach outings, or as many did that time, celebrate and jeer the night away at disco clubs. In an attempt to entice these party-hungry individuals, the management of Ozone Disco Club decided to give a promo: a discounted price of 50 pesos entrance fee to all graduate students, on top of a 50% discount on drinks and foods. The night was prime. One by one, then by groups, students and young professionals lined up outside. Slowly but surely, the promo was starting to look like a huge success. It was believed that by 9 p.m., the place was already jam-packed and was just breezing by and waiting to get the party started. To students and graduates, it was some needed relaxation and enjoyment after enduring almost a year worth of school projects and assignments, triggering sleepless nights and restless minds. To some professionals, It was just to spend some time chilling after a hard day's work. As every individual wandered their way inside, they settled into their respective zones. As for the eager ones, the open dance floor was their heaven, shrugging off some of the adrenaline due to excitement. Mood was slowly getting into full swing while the techno remix of Plastic Dreams by JD was playing, with some believing this was the music cue to get the party started. At exactly 11:35 p.m., a spark suddenly ignited from the socket beside the DJ in his booth area, where multiple extension cords were plugged hosting several electronics. Shortly after, the spark climbed into the ceiling, setting it ablaze. Arnold Taguibao, a survivor, recalled his friend confidently saying,
Siguro props lang yan. Pare, props lang yan.
Arnold, in his bewildered but amazed state, responded with,
Oo nga no, ang galing ng props no. Bakit ganon? Ang galing ng props. Bakit lumalaki?
Realizing the trouble, DJ Mervin Reyes hoped to address the crowd about the matter and immediately reached for the microphone, but it didn't function, forcing him to address the crowd against the loudness of the music. He was then heard shouting,
Huwag kayong tumakbo!
Due to the statements of some survivors, they saw him fleeing the DJ booth area after shouting these words. Another survivor account told that there had been several folded paper receipts on the ceiling where the electrical sparks climbed, creating a vulnerable source of a flammable material for the fire to propagate immediately. After the fire in the ceiling started, a nauseating chemical smell black smoke cast throughout the area. The dense black smoke almost made some of the people vomit and lasted about 15 seconds, which was then followed by a blackout. Some were already alarmed about the matter, but some carried on dancing and drinking, still in the idea that this was part of the show, which probably was reinforced by what they heard from the DJ. As the blackout enveloped the whole first floor, the small fiery embers looming on the DJ's booth area was in full display in the eyes of the now hysterical people. The fiery embers, coupled with the dense black smoke, confirmed the gravity of the situation to everyone and had them rushing to the inner entrance door. Hysteria was written all over the place. The crowd, knowing only one way out of the disco, rushed to the inner entrance door, banging each other in a never-ending struggle to leave the premises. The big dilemma was, the stampeding people got crammed up in front of the door, and as has been mentioned before, the doors can only be opened by pulling towards when leaving the premises. There was no way the door was opening with tens and hundreds of people lined up and blocking its opening path. The club bouncers, who were startled with all the banging and noise inside, thought the commotion inside was a riot and shut down the doors. Micaela Reyes, another Ozone employee and survivor, recalled the locking was a standard order issued to the guards by the management. At that point, people inside were now suffocating from the smoke and had been screaming,
May sunog! May sunog! May sunog!
to the top of their lungs while ferociously banging the door. Sherlyn Bruan, a survivor of the tragedy, recalled moments during the crisis in an interview almost 2 decades later. She told people were clamping and meleeing one another, shouting desperately and using every inch of their might to knock and destroy the door that was preventing them from leaving the area. From what seemed like eternity of pounding and shouting, the inner door was finally opened and dragged inwards, which was followed by a large backdraft breezing through the narrow hallway and out the building, causing the hundreds of people blocking the door to fall forwards all at the same time. Those who were at the rear end of the stampede most likely torched to death. Those in the middle and to the door suffered second and third degree burns to their hair, hands and back, some with horribly burned ears and cheeks from the side of their faces. The wave of the backdraft was believed to have instantly killed some of the guests, but to the luck of some, this cleared the clogging and fortunately paved the way for most of the survivors to finally clear the building alive, though scarred and burned throughout. Sherlyn herself got second and third degree burns on her hands, as well as on her neck, frying her hair in the process. Luckily enough, she was one of the few ones who managed to crawl her way out after the backdraft. For context, A backdraft is a sudden burst of flames spiraling out of an enclosure. This mainly happens in oxygen-depleted environments where air does not circulate enough in and out of the area, and so fire does not combust properly. It is deemed a deadly scenario for everyone, especially firefighters trying to infiltrate the confined spaces of a burning building. As it seems unfortunate enough, the conditions at the disco that night was the perfect spark plug for a backdraft. So many people confined in a small space, an arid atmosphere, acoustic insulations riveting the walls, and the spark plug itself, the fire. After the huge backdraft, some who made it alive were now able to run. Some were left unconscious. Some heavily injured managed to crawl, and to the demise of those charred to death. Their bodies were left stacked up, one after the other, at the door. At this point, the fire had begun to spread to the majority of the building, burning everything combustible inside, including the collapsed human bodies. The mezzanine above the minibar had also collapsed, which had slammed down on the bodies of some people panicking, killing them in the process. The fire had lasted for more than an hour after the fire trucks arrived, even more burning the people that had been left inside and shunning any chances of survival, however little it was at the time. Those who managed to escape safely stared in horror at the burning disco from the outside. Some called and went home to their families. Those who needed immediate medical assistance went to the nearest hospital. Calls for help amidst the crying survivors were echoing the streets of Timog Avenue that midnight, and only in a few hours, the gruesomeness of whatever happened inside were in full display to all survivors, curious onlookers, and the local television media who had arrived at the scene to report the tragedy, viewed by millions of Filipinos in the early morning hours the next day. In the wee morning hours of March 19, local government units rushed to the scene to provide rescue and assistance to whoever or whatever was salvageable at that point. Firefighters were dousing the flames. Ambulances came in carrying several stretchers, and escaped partygoers rushed either to their homes or to the nearest hospital. Everyone was on the clock for safety. Onlookers and media reporters clogged the area trying to scoop every piece of information they could hassle. People were supposed to be sleeping at this time, but instead, they find themselves shocked and horrified by the crisis in front of their eyes. The fire had lasted for more or less 2 hours. It was declared a flame out around 1:32 a.m. that midnight, according to Moises Marcelo, a firefighter respondent. As soon as the flame was doused safely, respondents carrying stretchers rushed in and were the first to witness the horrible aftermath. Charred bodies, some stacked on top of the other, whereas several were found stacked 3 to 4 bodies high on the door, stifled the eyes of the respondents as they entered the 12-meter narrow hallway. It was a gruesome sight for anybody to see, even for them who are used to seeing this kind of human anomaly. Respondents were quick to scour the area for survivors, but it was a little too late. No one was alive by that time, and the place has become a charcoal reservoir. Respondents then took the next step, recovered the bodies, and safely carried them to the ambulance. The odds were a little too heavy on this one, since as they tried to carry the bodies one by one, they found themselves dealing with multiple human bodies conjoined with each other. Their skin almost melted away and glued to the other person's body. It was a daunting task trying to preserve any details of the charred human for later identification. Soon after they were able to move and lift the bodies, they were carried on the stretcher and then mobilized to the ambulances waiting outside, where onlookers, survivors, and media reports also had a first glance of what happened to the people burned inside. The remains of the charred people were brought to the nearby La Funeraria Paz Memorial, where they will be laid out open on the floor for identification by their families. And so, with the bodies recovered and the fire put out, leaving the building a dead burnt space. Investigation has now formally begun. In the morning of March 19, Quezon City Mayor Mel Matay and Vice Mayor Herbert Bautista visited the site to inspect and instruct local government officials to conduct a thorough investigation of this tragedy. As the investigation got rolling, the results of the effort would prove to be tragic and disheartening to the families and to the rest of the world. Detailed below are the critical investigation points that were reported to the public following the months and years of the tragedy. As officials had formally claimed as the cause based on multiple survivor accounts, the fire started on an electrical socket by the DJ's booth area, which was triggered by a sequence of short circuits because of an overload. Engineer Olegario Tabernilla, Electrical Division of the QC Engineer's Office in Quezon City, suspected that there may have been a consequent addition of electrical circuitries that was not submitted to their office for design approval. The ill-advised setup may have caused circuit breaker strip mechanism to fail because of the overload that had transpired. The official report filed iterates account at 162 dead people and 93 injured, with about 150 people either safe or suffered minor abrasions that were left off the injured list. The ludicrous amount of people inside the club that night was indeed due to the promo offered by the club, enticing hundreds of partygoers to avail a limited opportunity to chill and enjoy one of the city's hot spots. It was a promo highly targeting graduates, which was the reason why so many young people were killed in the fire. However, it was later revealed that while the discounts only applied to fresh graduates, there was no profile screening done for guests before entering the premises, not even a single school ID card to show genuinity, and thus everyone looking adolescent enough was permitted to the venue. 350 guests and 40 employees in a confined 200 square meter area, all enjoying and squeezing every bit of air and space inside. According to engineer Alfredo Macapugay, another member of the QC engineer's office that time, the structural master plan of the building permits only 50 to a maximum of 100 people inside, meaning the venue was almost 4 times occupied that it should have been legally. It was also important to note that while the master plan permits 50 to 100 people, the QC local government approved a building capacity of only 35 people. Despite the owners claiming the building had a fire exit, detailed investigation revealed that the identified fire exit door was simply another door, which was a tight walkway leading to the kitchen area of the adjacent disco City of Friends. The door was indeed an alternate exit before, but it had no distinguishable details that would identify it as a fire exit, and it was since then blocked upon the establishment of the said club a few years back. It was also revealed that while employees knew of its existence, only one of them used it during the panic. Even more alarming details were that all established fire extinguishers in the building had been dead and useless. There were also no sprinklers installed, which could have at least doused the flames enough when it was just starting. Another shocking finding was that the building permit was still the temporary one issued to Birdland, the previous establishment which ended 5 years ago. It was an important detail to acknowledge, as it was further found out that Ozone was originally allowed a permit for a residential house and not a commercial establishment, and so was a pass, the temporary building permit from the business before it was used as a means to continue operation. A mezzanine was also put in place a few years later after its establishment. This was an effort to expand the dance floor area, given the increasing number of patrons as the club gained popularity, but this was not included on the initial building blueprint, nor submitted as an updated one. Multiple hearings were tried and several cases were filed the following years, but it was only on March 16, 2001, when Westwood Entertainment President Hermino Ocampo and Treasurer Ramon Nang was sentenced guilty due to reckless imprudence, resulting to multiple homicide and multiple serious injuries, earning them 4 years in prison and owing the victims a total of 25 million pesos in damages concurred. There are also a number of pending cases yet to be finalized at the time. Later that year, November 2001, Sandigan Bayan charged 12 officials with the Quezon City Engineer's Office with reckless imprudence, resulting in multiple homicide and multiple physical injuries. 6 years later, Sandigan Bayan ordered the acquittal of one of the 12 officials, Alfredo Macapugay, for his role in granting the building permit for the operation of Ozone Disco. The case would finally come to its conclusion 18 years after the tragedy. In November 2014, the court handed down the final decision on the cases filed against Westwood and Engineers District employees. In a 125-page decision read in open court, Judge Ofelia Marquez handed the guilty beyond reasonable doubt verdict to 7 QC government officials and the 2 owners of Ozone Disco for violation of Section 3 of Republic Act 3019 or the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. The Engineer District officials are Alfredo Macapugay, Feliciano Sagana, Francisco Itliong, Rolando Mamaid, Petronilo de Llamas, Donato Rivera Jr., and Edgardo Reyes. Also tried are Westwood President Hermilo Ocampo and Treasurer Ramon Nang. They were proven to be in collusion to secure unwarranted benefits, advantage, or preference on the approval of 2 building permits and certificate of occupancy for the Ozone Disco operation, despite the numerous design flaws and safety inadequacies, and without conducting any safety inspection. All 9 persons were sentenced to 6 to 10 years in prison and are liable to pay 150,000 pesos to each of the families of the dead victims, while 100,000 pesos to the families of those injured. Judge Marquez cleared the criminal liability of 4 other people: Raquel Ocampo, wife of Hermino Ocampo, Alfredo Chua, Rosita Cu, and her son Sonny Cu. The decision cited they were merely stockholders or directors of the firm and had no direct supervision or participation in the day-to-day affairs of the establishment. The judge, however, ruled that all 6 stockholders will share in the 150,000 peso and 100,000 peso fines to the families of the dead and injured. According to the National Building Code of the Philippines, Chapter 7, Section 708, a section for rules regarding minimum requirements for Group A dwellings, it states entrance and exit points of a building that there shall be at least 1 entrance and another one for exit. As you may have known, there are technically 2 doors in the building, but the one is unusable at that point. Later that month, Inquirer.net published a report stating the court cited, the fire showed that the building officials in conspiracy with the others accused ignored the provisions of the National Building Code. The supposed alternative exit, which was located at the VIP lounge, was actually obstructed by a sofa and an LPG tank, which only led to a firewall. The decision also added the audacity of Westwood in the construction of Ozone Disco Club by evading compliance with important provisions of the National Building Code to suit its own business purposes is simply overwhelming. There can never be a slapdash approval of a building permit and certificate of occupancy. To shirk from this duty will certainly run at risk all safety standards contemplated by the National Building Code. Had the violations been averted at the first instance, the magnitude of those who died and those who continue to endure scars that would haunt them for life would not have happened. Survivors and families of the victims have moved on with their lives, despite the initial outcry of the court decision being deemed a little weak, calling it cheap justice. For years, the building has been abandoned in its skeleton outlook. Nobody took business in dealing with its tragic history, save for a few people who come often to the place on the day of the tragedy to light up candles in memoriam of those who perished that night. In March 2015, months after the verdict and a week before the 19th anniversary of the tragedy, the whole building was demolished, nailing the closure to a 2-decade-long haunting and vying for a new sense of life into the place. A fast food restaurant now lies on the settlement, serving Filipino dishes to the local masses. The Ozone Disco Club tragedy would then be known as one of the worst fire incidents in the world, 7th worldwide and the worst in Philippine history. For the survivors, a resolution, though it came almost 2 decades later, shed some closure to a scar that has been detrimental to them both physically and emotionally. For the culprits, it is a grim reminder that nothing gets past karma, that it will always haunt you back regardless of how long one endures evading it. For everyone else, it is a statement of how safety is a paramount element of human life, always and always will.